So
I would like to begin by welcoming all of you who are joining us today. We are so happy that you are here and that you are interested in the topic, and also to find out about this method we're trying to use. Also perhaps contribute some of your research and sources to the timeline. So, right, as a brief introduction to this session's organizers, we are all historians who, further to sharing our interest in circulation of knowledge, are also interested in incorporating a bit of digital methods into our research and teaching. And this workshop is an experimental attempt to combine these two interests in an interactive and online way. So while we all met during our PhD years in London, we are now separated across different continents, but we very much want to continue collaborating and working together and meet new scholars from around the world who share our interests. And so hybrid conferences such as this one, they provide us with a platform to do just that. So we really want to thank the conference organizers for creating this space. Today, the subject of our focus is a history of forest stewardship around the world. By focusing on the history of forest stewardship, we are faced with a fascinating view of humanity's evolving relationship with nature and our combined efforts to understand, use, and conserve natural resources, reflecting both on societal needs and environmental awareness. Our focus is on human-nature relationships and the implications on the environmental change, and the interplay between cultural, scientific, and technological advances in forestry, we think, offer a very interesting look into how societies have influenced and been influenced by interactions with environment over time. And we hope that with your help and involvement in this workshop, we can collectively spotlight the global nature of knowledge related to forest stewardship. We think the timeline approach that we will share with you today will help to highlight the circulation of knowledge and education about trees and forests, particularly the collaborative development of these practices in different parts of the world. Also central to this workshop is the question of how digital methods can be used to promote cultural exchange and work towards ensuring a more inclusive and culturally sensitive approach to the history of science education. One way we think can work towards this is to co-create study resources to ensure plurality of histories and voices being spotlighted and included in the narrative. So the purpose of this workshop today is therefore twofold. To discuss the topic of forest stewardship around the world, and also our didactic practices, and to co-create a study resource in a form of a timeline. So to achieve this, we have structured this 2-hour session in the following way. So we begin with this welcome and introduction. Then we will have 2 wonderful talks by Natalia and Lily, followed by a Q&A. So please think of some questions for Lily and Natalia while you listen to them, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask them after they are both finished. We'll then take a short break, after which we'll continue to discuss. And then we will dive into the practical element of co-creating the timeline. For that, you will need a computer or a tablet. For those of you joining us online, you already have that, so it should be fine for those joining us in person. If you don't have a laptop, maybe join someone who's sitting next to you who does. And then, yeah, so due to the time constraints of the session, and because we want to give you plenty of time to interact with us, I will not be presenting my own research today, but in case you are interested, I will just briefly let you know that I focus on circulation of knowledge as facilitated by migrants between Latin America and partitioned Poland in the 19th century. Although recently I'm extending my geographical and temporal scope as I begin to collaborate with colleagues at my institute. I currently work in Germany at the Institute of Geoanthropology on a project related to mapping deforestation and resistance to this around the world. But that's enough about me. So without further ado, I will now introduce our wonderful speakers and the session's co-organizers. So Natalia Gandara is an assistant professor at the Institute of History of the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Valparaíso in Chile. She is currently working on a project about the knowledge history of the Juan Fernandez Islands environment. She has also previously published other articles in relation to these islands and a number of other fascinating topics, including the role of gender and place on the validation of knowledge. Patcharaviran Jarapacharapon, or Lily, as she is informally known, is a lecturer in modern history at the Department of History in the Faculty of Arts at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. While she generally focuses on the Cold War, one aspect of her research is on relationships between India and Thailand in the modern time. She's currently working on a project about forestry links between the two at the turn of the 20th century. So Natalia will speak first, and then Lily, and then they will take questions. So please, Natalia, take it away. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Hey, well, I'm very excited to be here. We have created this topic, and the idea is to create a collaborative environment. So first, I'm gonna do this overview, and in this presentation that would be fairly short. I'm sorry, because of this an overview, it will be very general, and I'm very happy to say that we have some historians who are specialists in central Chile forest stewardship and cultural practices and policies regarding forest in the 19th and 20th century. So we can further speak with them as Yerko and Lorena are here in the session, which I'm really, really happy about. So first, I would like to start this presentation with a quote from the World Bank, and this is fairly recent. It's a booklet presented in 2020, and this booklet argues that Chile is one of the few countries in the world that has managed to reverse deforestation, with its net forest cover continuously increasing over the past decades. And at first sight, this is a wonderful news. How great is that Chile is one of the few countries that managed to reverse deforestation. However, this is a misleading and highly problematic approach towards forest stewardship and forest management. And what I would like to highlight is how we arrive to this point in terms of creating an overview of the forestry history and the cultural relationship that Chileans over the past century have developed towards the forest. And I'm gonna spoil by saying that this not only is misleading, but it's untrue. Why? Because we have been introducing in the past few decades, 60, 50 years from the 1950s and onwards, foreign species that had led to forest plantation. And this forestation that the World Bank has highlighted, it's not really forest as a complex environment, but this human-made environment that is less complex, and it affects biodiversity, and it goes hand in hand with several other environmental projects and problems. So, if you're not familiar with Chile, I would like to start by saying a couple of starting points. First, we are a republic located in the southern tip of South America, and it's generally known because of the weird, narrow shape. However, um, Chile has a unique geography, not only in terms that we have one of the most diverse ecosystems, and we have a variety of climates, but also we have several types of forest, from rainforest in the central region of Valdivia, center south region of Valdivia, to the template and cold forest located in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, to one of the most arid environments in the world in the Atacama Desert. However, there we also have the presence of arid forest. So it's a unique geography with a great variety of ecosystem, and therefore a great variety of different kinds of forest. Now, our relationship with forests extends about 15,000 years ago, and forests have been crucial environments for the human communities that have inhabit the what we know as the territory of Chile. And I'm gonna go as far as to argue that forests had enabled human life, and they have been a core resource and a core environment, and humans over the past 15,000 years have developed a crucial and intimate relationship with the forest, and it has enabled human life both in the early modern and modern periods, but also in pre-Hispanic period. And in regarding to this, we have that pre-Hispanic populations have transformed, use, and have an intense relationship with the forest in all these different environments. However, since this is an overview, I'm not going to be able to highlight and go in depth towards explain a bit more about pre-Hispanic population, because I would like to highlight is how European colonization since the 16th century onwards introduced different attitudes toward this environment, which meant new practices and approaches to forest management. And here, I would like to highlight two main aspects that dramatically change human relationship with forest. So, European colonization intensified landscape transformation as Chile was introduced to early globalization processes, and that meant, for example, that one crucial aspect of this relationship was forest cleaning for the aim of increased productivity, particularly in mining and agricultural, as well as logging activities. And the second aspect that was increased, although we now know that pre-Hispanic population also did this, is the introduction of exotic species, which transform dramatic the landscape of these different environments. Now, for this presentation, I would like to underscore and reflect upon the structural problems that came with this landscape transformation, and particularly with forest clearing. So first, we would like to highlight wildfires and biodiversity loss, which intensified in the 20th and 21st century. But very importantly, I would like to highlight in this time soil erosion as a fundamental problem that came with the intensification of mining, logging, and agricultural practice. And soil erosion became a major problem from the late 18th century all throughout the 19th and 20th century. So this became one of the largest problems, environmental problems in the 19th and 20th century in particular. So here I have, for example, one really important visual primary source that actually highlights and showcase soil erosion due to these productive activities, particularly logging and mining. So by the late 19th century and early 20th century, soil erosion, and sorry, the Spanish um, in the screen, became one of the biggest concerns for the authorities, for politicians, for natural historians and biologists, and what we now would call ecologists. So both politicians, the state, and these scientists and science practitioners develop several plans for the transformation of these environments. And the main idea was to restore the forest. And they didn't restore, of course, with native species, but they thought that the most important way to go, the most relevant plant would be to introduce fast growing species. That meant the introduction of exotic species, especially different kinds of pines and eucalyptus. And this was mainly because native species such as the Chilean palm or different other kinds of trees they take a lot of time to grow. And these species, these foreign species, were considered much more productive, and they would, that was the aim, they would grow faster. And the goal here was twofold. First, to increase soil productivity, because this was becoming a major economic problem as well as social problem. And then it was also the aim to satisfy the internal demand of forest derived products such as wood and cellulose. And this is in the context of a fast growing industrial landscape. And this plan was legitimized by the main actors. It was legitimized by the politicians, the scientists, the bureaucrats, and also by the larger public. And all throughout the 20th century, these plans, these policies intensified. And one of the most crucial aspects that largely transformed many of these environments was the legislative decree of 1974 that actually presented tax incentives or direct subsidies from the state to develop these forest plantations. And these forest plantations largely transform the territory, the Chilean territory. So this graph actually showcase how important in terms of territory the outcomes that came from these policies. So from the 1950s to the first decades in the 21st century, we have a dramatic increase in planted forest and the introduction of uh, of these foreign species at a not only larger scale but huge scale. And as you can see, and it's something that it presents itself even nowadays. So it's pretty much a current affair. And here we could have the impact of these scientists. In particular, I would like to highlight the role of this German scientist, Federico Albert, in the implementation of this policy. Now, these have had enormous consequences, territorial consequences, social, cultural, and of course, economic and environmental consequences. So, for example, this is a small sample of how these plantations have transformed the local environment. And here we have the um, cartographical depiction of the Araucanía region, one of the densest, most important regions in terms of forest culture, but also logging and economic, and logging as a core economic exploitation activity. And on brown here, you can see how in the last few decades we have these gigantic forest plantations, and on green we have what remains of native forest. Now, with climate change, this had sadly meant that all these environments have been have become even more vulnerable to um, climate transformation and environmental transformation, making Chile one of the most vulnerable environments, especially regarding to wildfires. So basically, the introduction of these plantations change the structure and the dynamics of the forest. And here we have a picture of last summer uh, with a huge fire that sadly killed hundreds of people, but also meant the entire disruption of hundreds of native forest and human forest in my region in Valparaiso. So climate change has accentuated the problems of these 100 and so years policy, and had led the forest uh, more vulnerable than ever to these human-made environmental practices. However, I do not want to finish with a sad note, since we are trying to do this timeline as a collaborative tool, and we want to share how we have been creating different forest relationship with human and forest relationship all throughout the history and throughout different histories, and societies. I would like to highlight how in this process, especially in the modern period, we have had early warning voices that have reported and claimed and have taken into action, not only say something about the vulnerability of the forest and the forest environment, but also have came into action. So I would like to highlight the work of Claude Gay, a French naturalist that worked in Chile in the 1830s, and he was one of the first few people that called for governmental action, that reported the vulnerability of certain species and forest environment. And then in the late 19th century, very early on, the Chilean Congress approved a law that actually aimed to manage logging and deforestation. And that had led to new approaches towards forest, especially in the 20th century. We have several conservation policies, and Latin America, as the US, conservation policies were introduced fairly recently. And one of the few countries that introduced laws in the late 19th and early 20th century. And in Chile, that meant the creation of natural reservations, and later on national parks, and the creation of a national institution that managed that. And lately, and this is a very interesting plan, the Chilean forestry policy that aims to restore over 500 hectares using mainly native species. Now, we can discuss the impact of this policy, but I don't want to end in a gloomy note, so I'm just going to highlight how in this past decade, especially, not only policymakers, politicians, intellectuals, scientists have create a new relationship towards the forest, but this is an aspect, a discourse, a narrative that is pretty much ingrained now in the larger public, especially with the wildfires that had led to a new approach and awareness of the importance of forest. That's it.
Thank you so much, Natalia. If you have questions for Natalia, please remember them. And Lily.
Oh, yes. Let me share you with my screen. Can you see my PowerPoints? Oh, great. Is it in full screen right now? What about now?
Still in presenter mode.
Right now you're sharing your presenter screen.
Sorry?
You're sharing your presenter screen. So if you do Alt Tab,
oh yeah. Maybe let's do it from here. Because I'm using Mac and I'm not sure how to convert Alt and Tab.
I think if you exit sharing your screen, make your presentation full screen and then share your screen again, it should work.
Okay, let's try again. It doesn't seem to.
If you stop sharing your screen for a second.
The problem is I cannot find the Zoom.
Okay.
Well,
maybe press
I can see you on the shortcut video, but I try to press on the zoom icon a few times.
Press F3 on your keyboard.
Yes.
It should show you all the different.
Nope.
No, okay. Don't worry. Then just show us
What
how.
can you see? What can you see on your screen now? Can you see the PowerPoint or?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint at the moment.
All right, let's use it as it is. I'm sorry, everyone, I'm not the most tech-savvy person on the planet, but I'm trying, and I'm so grateful for this online platform that allows us to collaborate and to share our research with you across the world. So let me join you in Canada in spirit. While I'm sitting here in Bangkok at 7:34 in the evening, Friday night, and I'm so happy to be here. And as you can see on the screen, my full name is there for the formality. Please call me Lily. And thank you all for coming here. The topic of my talk today is the center of tropical forestry. British India as the interlocutor of modern natural science, which I look at how the knowledge of scientific forestry spread across the world with a focus on India in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And unlike what Natalia has presented to you, it's more about how this knowledge led to an increase in teak logging and deforestation. So we're talking about how human has destroyed our forest resources in mainland Southeast Asia at the turn of the 20th century. So I would like to start with the movement of students that I follow. In 1901, the Siamese government began sending students to the Imperial Forest School in Dehradun, British India. These students were to study the noble subject of tropical forestry that would enable the government to tap into the wealth of the teak forest in the north of Siam, or Thailand as it was called then. This forestry connection led to an entanglement between the natural science practitioners active in British India and the Siamese students fresh from the independent kingdom east of India. So in this presentation, I hope to shed light on the place of British India in the circulation of scientific knowledge, featuring the case of Siamese students in Dehradun. And I would like to propose that far from a passive backdrop in the circulation of modern scientific knowledge, British India was actually an active contributor to the construction of knowledge of tropical forestry. And through this, India was transformed into a center of tropical forestry within the British Imperial network and beyond. Let me tell you that this research is still in its early stage, and I will be very grateful for suggestions and comments at the end of the presentation. And this work is built on this scholarship. So on the left, you have Ravi Rajan, who argues that the modern forestry in India was just a blunt import of German forestry tradition, which of course led to deforestation in the country and conflict between local people who used to live in the forest and the state. Gregory Barton argues that actually the circulation of forestry knowledge in this period led to a more British tradition within the British Empire. And lately, Maurice von Brescius, he discovered the German science practitioners who were active in the imperial network of the British Empire. So my argument here is that first, far from a passive backdrop in the circulation of modern scientific knowledge, British India was an active contributor to the construction of knowledge of tropical forestry. Second, the forestry school in India preceded those in Britain and North America. And through this, British India became a center of tropical forestry. Thirdly, German science practitioners such as Schlick and Brandis were instrumental in the construction of tropical forestry in India and later in other parts of the British Empire. And lastly, at the end, it was at Dehradun, not at Cooper Hills, that foreign governments sent their students to study tropical forestry, as demonstrated by the case of Siamese government. So I first mapped the circulation of knowledge through the establishment of forestry school in the world. As you can see on the maps here, I put some red dots to show the forestry schools with tie to the British Empire, and the yellow dot here is some school that was not tied to the British Empire. So you can see that the first dedicated forestry school was established in Hesse, in Germany, even though forestry has been taught earlier in Central Europe, including at the University of Gießen in Germany and other places there. And then we see that in 1844, we see the first forestry school established in Spain. And within about 30 years, the first forestry school established in Dehradun, India, which is here. Time goes by, and in 1885, the first forestry course was taught at the Royal Indian Engineering College at Cooper's Hill in London, the United Kingdom. Here, not so long after that, the Siamese government here established their Royal Forest Department to deal with teak logging and selling to the world market. And then so I want to note that the school in India came before the school in America. You got that in 1898, first forestry school in North America, the Biltmore Forest School, and the New York State College of Forestry at the Cornell University. And from 1905, Cooper Hill was shut down and forestry education moved to Oxford, Cambridge, and Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. In 1915, we've got the first forestry course in Siam. So you can see the spread of institution and the knowledge that come together of this modern forestry through the flow. Let's see the flow or the mapping of these schools across the world. And then I would like to highlight the role of the German science practitioners in the British Imperial Network, which had been overlooked for a long time because people did not expect them to be there. People used to think that within the British Empire, there must have been British officers filling these jobs, but it wasn't the case. And we discovered that the German scientists actually, they were contributing so much to the British imperial system. So the first person to highlight here is someone called Dietrich Brandis, who was from Bonn, and he has a training in botany in Copenhagen, Göttingen, and Bonn. He became a lecturer in botany at Bonn University and became forestry academic and forest administrator upon arrival in Burma, which was then British India, in 1855. And this move was through a connection of his first wife, Rachel Marshman. He later worked with the British Imperial Forestry Service and became the founder of the forestry school there in Dehradun. He was a mentor of William or Wilhelm Schlicht, which we'll discuss him later. And this person, Brandis, became known as the father of the tropical forestry. His major work include this book here you can see on the screen, Indian Trees, which was published in 1906, and it draws on his knowledge from his years in Indian forest. The second person I'd like to introduce to you is William or Wilhelm Schlicht, who was also a German-born forester, and he was graduated from the University of Gießen in 1862, and he got his PhD in 1867. He moved to British India in the same year as he finished his PhD and joined the Indian Forest Service. He became a mentee of District Brandis and helped him establish a journal, Indian Forester, in 1874, which is still a very good source when it comes to tropical forestry. He was also instrumental to the establishment of the school in Dehradun in 1877. He spent altogether 19 years in British India. And this is the key work of Schlicht, the Manual of Forestry, which was a manual for British foresters who would be posted to the Indian forest and helped with extracting the resource there. But what's interesting here is this quote actually. So we can see that from this quote, the intention of the author. So Brandis wrote that in publishing his Manual of Forestry, the author, Schlicht, wished in the first instance to place in the hands of the students at the Cooper's Hill Forest School a handbook, a manual, to facilitate their studies in order to give the needful professional training to young Englishmen who desired to enter the Indian Forest Department. But accordingly, when the first volume of that manual appeared in 1889, it was natural that some who took a strong interest in the progress of forest management in the British Indian Empire were surprised that the book did not deal with Indian trees, and that its teaching related to the oak, the beech, the Scotch pine, and other trees of Europe. And by some of these zealous friends of Indian forestry, the book was pronounced a failure because it did not treat of Indian forestry. And then he went on to justify his mentee's decision to write the manual this way. And Brandis said, the principles which guide the forester in the proper treatment of his woods are the same all over the world, in India as well as in Europe. But while the application of these principles to the treatment of Indian forests is not more than 35 years old, the methodical and systematic treatment of European forests is of old standing and has stood the test of experience. He went on to compare the oak tree to the teak tree and beech to bamboo. In this, he said, or he wrote, to be more accurate, in the teak forest of Burma, the bamboo has a position similar to that of the beech in the oak forest of the Spessart, which is a forest in southwest Germany. Oak and teak are both trees with comparatively light foliage. In the Spessart, the beech is associated with the oak in the same manner as the bamboo is the chief associate of the teak tree in Burma. And the principles of silviculture are the same everywhere, and the application of these principles to the treatment of woods in different parts of the globe has, in many instances, led to the adoption of similar methods. Hence, Dr. Schlick was right in selecting the timber trees of Europe to illustrate the application of these principles in the manual before us. And then I would like to highlight the role of the Siamese forestry students in India. So as I mentioned before, that the Siamese government began sending students to India from the turn of the 20th century. And the first group of students, there were 4 students, ทองคำเสวตศิลา วัด วันทุพรามนับกุล เอื้อสุภมิตร อ่านลบ นิยมเลิก They traveled to Dehradun to study at this college, which you can see in the slide here. Another 2 students followed in 1908 and another one in 1911. And then the last group of students, Sunna Ubon, Hun, last name unknown, and Prano, last name unknown, follow in 1912. When it comes to last name unknown in the Thai history, if you have any basis of the Thai names and so on, it was because the system of surname was not introduced until quite a recent time. So in the historical documents, it was not uncommon to see people with other last name. Also, that first name also changed throughout the step of their life. But that's another question. I'm happy to talk about it when we have time in the Q&A. And then the last student was enrolled in this college in 1920. And the reason for this is because there was a new school, another forestry school under the British Indian government, was opened in 1912 in Pinmana in British Burma, which was closer geographically from Thailand. And all of these students were trained in a 2-year course before returning to Siam and work in the Royal Forestry Department. The first group of 4 students returned to work under the British forester, which was borrowed from British India in 1903. And we know these details from his memoir here. Why were they sent to India? So before that time, before they started to send students to India, the Siamese government had been borrowing foresters from British India, from the British government. And some of the advisors are from that lot. But archival document shows that although these advisors did not specify the school in India in their report, the choice of school selected for Thai students was likely to influenced by 2 reasons. Firstly, it was due to the training background, as well as professional connection of Slade and Tottenham, the British colonial foresters. And secondly, it might have been because of the teak forest in India, which which were more similar to the forest in Thailand. And that is why the Thai government did not send their students to Germany, even though the Thai ambassador to Berlin has made that suggestion. They say that studying a forestry school in India would have been more beneficial for Thai forestry students than the equivalent schools in Europe. This was because there are greater similarities between the tropical fauna and flora in Siam and India more than Siam in Europe. And this meant that the modern knowledge of forestry theorized in Europe, as they understood them, would have incorporated local knowledges of tropical Asian forest. And this was particularly the case for teak forest, which was in the Siamese government intention that students would become expert on. And to understand this movement, this circulation of knowledge, I have made some visualization. On the screen, you see 3 circles. One represents Germany, another represents British India, and the other Britain. And this is because the first generation, or first group of forestry experts in British India came from Germany, and then they later moved on to Britain. And then I put on the label of what kind of forestry they were doing there. So in Germany, we had continental forestry, which was then developed into tropical forestry in British India and sent to Britain. And when we put on this colonial status, let's say, of British India and Britain, you see that what might be surprising here is that the knowledge developed in a colony was sent back to metropole. So something, especially at this time, at the turn of the 20th century. And this is what I hope to show you how the knowledge of forestry has spread across the world. So we have Germany transfer it to North America and British India. And from British India, we have it transferred to Siam, which was outside of British imperial system, outside of the British Empire. It was independent then. And 2 other British colonies, and to Britain as well. This again highlight the role of the British colony, the role of the colony in the contribution of the knowledge. And this can bring us to the conclusion of my presentation. So let me recap my main points here. So I argue that British India was an active contributor to the construction of knowledge of tropical forestry. Secondly, the forestry school in India came before those in Britain and North America. And through this, British India was transformed into a center of tropical forestry. Third, German science practitioners, such as Schlicht and Brandes that we have seen, were instrumental in the construction of tropical forestry. And at the end, it was at the school in India, instead of Cooper Hills in London, that foreign governments from Siam, such as Siam and other British colonies, sent their students to study tropical forestry. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Lily. We will, Natalia and Lily will now take questions regarding the presentation. If anyone has any, please raise your hand and turn on your mic and ask a question.
I'll start. Thank you for this. I have actually many questions, but I'll start with just one. course, for Natalia, when you were talking about the introduction of fast-growing species like pine and eucalyptus in Chile in the early 20th century, you briefly mentioned that it created a number of problems, including social problems. And I was wondering if you could just like tell us a tiny bit what those problems were.
Well, there are several long-term problems. First of all, biodiversity loss. Second of all, problems with the quality of the soil. Thirdly, and very, very, very important, especially in the region that I showcased, the Araucanía region, this was also done in uh, the aftermath of the expansion of the Chilean states towards indigenous territory. So Chile, as in the US, in Argentina, in Canada, and other parts such as Mexico, expanded, but in the second half of the 19th century towards frontier spaces, one of them being the Araucanía region, another one being the Patagonia region and Tierra del Fuego. So we have the process of the expansion of the Chilean state that also it's framed in a broader context of globalization and the exploitation of raw materials. And this area, the Araucanian region, was highly prized by the quality of timber. So very early on, we have not only colonization process, but projects of exploitation of forests for the logging activities at a large scale. But this resource became scarce very early on. So we have important problems regarding forests in the early 20th century. And as a result of that, we have the creation of these plantations that were being produced in indigenous territories. So they were basically removed, as well, this was a process of cultural and human annihilation. So now we have not only an environmental problem, but also a social, cultural, and political problem. And here we have Yerko, who has been develop his research, his doctoral research, right, Yerko? Your PhD thesis on this, so we can talk a little bit more about this regarding this crucial and really relevant region, but that is also a national problem. So for example, in my region, which is a historically colonized period, not we didn't have problems with indigenous population, mainly because they were wiped out early in the 16th century. We still have these environmental problems, and especially the what we have now is inequality, and so there are many intricate and complex problems regarding these plantations. The most crucial one for my region, for the Valparaiso region, is the transformation of the local landscape and the integration of these new forests, which make the landscape more vulnerable to wildfires, because they require other environmental resources, mainly more water, and therefore they're less resilient to the droughts and the climate change in the last few decades. Jerko, I don't know if you would like to reply to Melanie in a much broader way.
Oh, good morning. Thank you. My English is not good, but I will try to speak. No, about that, I have other question.
Oh, okay.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's so interesting, this investigation. Lily, I was thinking about your research in Chile, for example, we have a lot of this of these themes, but we have a problems, no? All these things happen in Chile, no? But with a with a problem is the nationalism methodological, no? So your perspective is so global, no? This is a work to me for us to see this problem in this scale, no? And I have a question for Natalia about the knowledge or forestal knowledge, for example. In this case, or in your research, what happened with the private enterprise, for example? We have in Chile important enterprise like CMPC, for example, and they participate in a lot of political. For example, we have a important people like Fernando Lenis, for example. Then he participated in the dictatorship, for example. This is my question. What about this?
That is really important question. So since this was an overview, I wanted to highlight some crucial actors from natural historians such as Albert, that later became one of the most important conservationists of his time. So he did wrong, but also then he did right. And so just to showcase how complex the situation, and it's not black and white, it's more nuanced than that, and highly more nuanced than that. And then we have the state, and I wanted to highlight some core policies, but from the beginning, privates and private companies had been relevant actors that they actually were able to implement what was been produced in a legislative way. So the laws, especially in the late 19th and early 20th century, the law actually enable the companies and the privates to intervene in the forest. First, in the native forest, with the exploitation of crucial species such as alerces and different kinds of oaks, and of course the Araucaria pine, and different other sources, like for example in Juan Fernandez Island, which is the region that I'm currently doing um, my research, the chonta palm and the sandalwood. So these are really important actors, and the law is enabled them first with the exploitation of these native species, and later on with the creation of a legislative and political framework that allow them to bring these foreign species and create huge plantations. So there are at the core, in your region, Yerko, in the Araucanian regions, colonizers transform themselves into private companies, and they install this new cultural approach towards forest. So they were crucial aspect, and you are right to highlight that out. Lorena, you are mute.
Thank you so much for this interesting Yesterday I was reading a book about.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me? No.
We can kind of hear, but your voice is being cut off. Maybe it's easier if you type the question for us.
Great.
Maybe now, can you hear me better? Yes?
Yes.
Good, perfect. I was going to say that yesterday I was reading a book about Mexico and the complexity of these issues with laws about the stewardship is that not always they produce the result they are intended to. So, for instance, there in 1926, they created this law to protect forest, which created massive deforestation because peasants flooded these places, fearing that the state was going to block them away forever from the resource. And in Chile, what we have seen in this early period before 1950s is that the laws that created enormous forest reserves and created like systems to get land grants inside forest had a similar effect, you know, like that the people that used to use the forest for logging and for food, you know, the araucaria seeds were very important for the Mapuche people, got into these spaces that were protected by the state. So I think it's interesting to see how that if you have seen how this unfolds in your area of study, like how do you know what I mean? Like how what are the dynamics of forest reservation in relationship with the laws and how people respond to these laws?
That's a wonderful question, and I'm gonna delve my answer based on the Juan Fernandez Islands. You know, if you're not familiar with the Juan Fernandez Island, these are the islands that um, inspire Robinson Crusoe's, Daniel Defoe's story, right? So these are oceanic island, really particular environments because there wasn't human presence until the late 16th century. So one of the few places on Earth without human presence for millions of years. And these are wonderful environments to kind of think about human relationship in the early modern period and also in the modern period. And these islands are one of the most vulnerable places in the whole world, because they are islands. They have a unique endogamic, I don't know how to say it, sorry, environment. And the in from the 16th century onwards, we have a systematic logging activity that dramatically transformed the entire landscape with the introduction not only of flora, exotic flora, but also exotic fauna. And this became a massive issue in the late 19th century. So people, political authorities started to introduce very early on in the 1870 onwards logging policies pretty early on. And also in the early 20th century, these islands became one of the first national parks with forest conservation policies being in place. However, this remained, and this is a structural problem in Latin America. These national parks were put on paper, but not, there wasn't really the state didn't have enough resources to really implement. So people in the island, a population that was at the time about 500 people, between 500 and 600 people at the time in the early 20th century, they develop or they continue their relationship towards the island in the same manner, and they continue logging. And actually, tourism highlighted these environmental problems. So we have the early implementation of conservation policies, but they weren't able to really be implemented by an institution, by actors who were fostering these kind of policies. So what I would like to introduce into this conversation to forest management and forest stewardship is the concept of failure, and how people in the past implemented these new ideas that at the time seem wonderful for biodiversity laws, especially for the quality of soils and the erosion problems in central Chile, but also in insular landscapes such as Juan Fernandez. And 50 years onwards, we now see that this brought even greater problems. So failure and our knowledge really needs to be taken into account, and in this cultural relationship towards forest.
Thank
Can
you.
I
Katie,
say something briefly? If
Yes.
there are
Yeah, briefly, and then I think there's a question from the audience in the room.
Okay,
and
yeah,
then
take the question.
also from Melanie. So yeah.
Hi, this is so I'm Ian Stewart. I'm not on Zoom, so I'm in the room here with Melanie and other people. This is a question for Lily.
Yes.
Lily, it's about your point in your paper, in your presentation, where Schleck uses. Can you hear me, Lily?
Yes, I can hear you.
Where Schleck uses a kind of analogy between the species in India and the species in England, right? In his work, multi-volume. And I just wanted to, pardon, in the manual.
So the teak and the oak and the beech and
Yes, exactly. So I just wanted to be clear on your argument, because Schlick had, by that point, spent much more time in India than he had in England, right? So my question was, although the analogy that he uses is justified because of our deeper knowledge of English forests, was your point that he was able to make this analogy at all because he was bringing his knowledge of Indian species to his knowledge of English, of English species? Because it sounded like what the defense of him doing so made sense, because we knew much more about English forests than we knew about Indian forests. But the reverse would have been true for Schleck. Is that kind of your point, that the language went from, the knowledge went from the periphery to the center, as it were?
Exactly.
Okay, that was
That was my point. And I think the time he spent in India was really crucial to our analysis here, that it allows him to identify the similarity between these trees and floras, which might have been so different from the outlook.
So on that foundation, then, just to clarify, because I don't know the work in question, so I don't know the basis upon which the analogy was made. Was it a kind of ecological function argument, that they function in their ecosystem in analogous ways, and that's what made him do that? Or was it Was it more the species are similar in their foliage structure and in their root systems, et cetera? Or was it an ecological argument that made for an analogy, or was it a species similarity argument, if I can put it that way?
In my opinion, it was more of the first one. It was of the ecological similarities rather than the species.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else for me? Anything I can?
I have the next question. It's kind of like what happens after your story. I was struck by how, in a way, there are many similarities between your story about tropical forestry and the story of tropical medicine. And tropical medicine is surprisingly still alive and well, despite being something that medically makes very little sense. And I was wondering, because you showed how tropical forestry ends up influencing forestry in places that are not in the tropics, like Britain and right, in a way, Germany influences North America, but Germany has like this door towards India. So what happens afterwards? Does tropical forestry continues developing as a discipline? It seems to me that under the tropics, forests must be so diverse and so different from one another that grouping them that way must be scientifically very, not very useful. Because different places will have different soil, will have different trees, will have, so it seems to me that it makes sense only from an exploitative perspective, right? Like when we're saying, oh, they're all interested in teak, right? And they're trying to displace species around the world rather than understanding the forest they have.
Yeah, I think you're right in that regards, that they put that focus on the teak and how they could extract more teaks from the forest. And at the end of the story, I think we would see something very similar to Natalia's presentation, that those natural forests or native forests has become more monoculture throughout the process, because it was concentrated on the teak yield.
So my question, and it may be also a question for Natalia, those species, right, that become so important for the industry and that are transplanted like this, are they ever considered a kind of invasive species? Yeah.
Sorry, Melanie, can you repeat the question?
Well, so here we'll talk about invasive species, about certain things like Japanese nutmeg, because they get into our gardens and there are a lot of work to get rid of. But I never hear people talk about trees as invasive species. But it seems that, teak and pine and eucalyptus could be seen as invasive species when they're retransplanted like this, even if it's willingly by people who want to grow them.
Yes, they are invasive species, and we have seen the most horrendous outcomes of these now unwanted colonizers. But the truth is that the state and these intellectuals stimulate the arrival of these colonizers, and they have been very, very successful. They grow taller, stronger, and they actually competed out. I don't know if that's the term, but they competed and they won in the race of colonization of Central and South environments, and even in Juan Fernandez. But not only these species, we have a kind of berry that are I don't know how, bushes and they colonized every ravine in Juan Fernandez Island, and they managed to suffocate the lesser or minor vegetation in these islands. But at first, they were conceived as very positive because they would remove the problem of soil erosion, the quality of soils. However, very quickly, it became notorious that the soil quality decreased because these colonizers they sucked up every resources, and they wiped out minor vegetation and also all the food chain, and they basically destroy entire ecologies. So now we have a decreased number of not only native flora but related native fauna.
If I could jump in that a bit, the notion of invasive species when it comes to plant did not become a discourse until the early 2000s in Thailand, with the introduction of eucalyptus as the paper tree. And I remember so vividly how much protest it sparked at the time. But the company continued anyway. So the way they did it was to confine the area just for the eucalyptus and try not to have it spread out so much.
Here is the contrary. You have hundreds of kilometers just with eucalyptus and pine, which it not only wiped the native flora and fauna, but now it's a major landscape, a part of the landscape, and it's striking how these colonizers are also related to the increase on wildfires in the region.
I have some remarks, but I'm not sure if we still have time. Alex, how are we doing time-wise?
Ideally, we would move on now to the timeline, just so we have the 20 minutes or so to go through that, and then maybe at the end we will have a bit more time for discussion. But I just realized my laptop is running out of battery, so I'm just going to plug in. So if you really quickly want to tell your point, that would be great.
Oh yeah, so it just struck me how the big contrast between the force of colonization in Chile and what happened in Southeast Asia when it comes to forestry. Like Natalia said, that those colonizers morph into private companies when it comes to deforestation. But what happened to the forest law in Thailand at the turn of the century is that the state had became monopolized on the forest, and they drove out those British companies which were private and active there before.
Oh wow.
And through that process, the state has a monopoly of control over logging and selling of teak, and they also took away authority of local leaders in the area. And so some historians consider this as part of the internal colonization of the Thai state over the northern areas. So this is all I wanted to say to Natalia. But I think it's really interesting move.
How they overlap. I wanted to highlight another thing is that we need to take into account the German connections, because here also Germans were on the forefront of forest management, and the government was a crucial interlocutor, and they articulate this knowledge and scientific networks. and the Germans were called upon to consider forestry and the forest problem at the time.
So being based in Germany, I am very happy to help both of you girls with any sources or archival visits that you need. And now I know we had scheduled like a little break, but I don't think we have time for that. So I'm really sorry to everyone about this, but I think the discussion has been wonderful and I didn't want to cut that short. So I'll just, without further ado, move on to tell you a little bit about this timeline tool that we have been working on. It's not one that we developed ourselves. It's something that exists open source online. The intention was here to give you enough time to add things yourself to this timeline and also to discuss some questions in relation to teaching and using digital tools. We can kind of try to combine all these things in the remaining half an hour of session. So I'll share this. Can you see my screen? It should be saying woman in computing.
Not yet.
No, maybe
Yes.
there's a delay. Okay, wonderful. So as I said, this TimelineJS is a pre-developed tool. It allows you to create timelines such as this one about women in computing. We have begun creating our own timeline about forestry that so far we populated with a few documents like this early map from Poland of the
Alex, you froze.
Yeah. I think she tried to get out and get in again. While we are waiting for Alex, wait, hang on. I can hear your voice. I was going to say that I just noticed some message on the chat, and it's from Alan from McCormick. And he said, in the 19th century, kale from Croatia, mangoes from India, and hops from Bavaria, peaches from China, avocados from Chile, and pomegranate from Malta were all made possible by USA-based food explorer David Fairchild, who was a son-in-law of Cape Bretoner, Alex Graham Bell. Yes.
Thank you, Alex, for that. Yes, there's much to explore here, and that's why we've been very keen develop this tool, which has a very global aim, just to further the conversation and enhance the links and networks regarding our cultural approach and cultural history towards forest, and how knowledge about forest has been built over the past centuries. And that's why I'm gonna continue to explaining what we are doing here. And let's see over here. Let me show you how to write and how to introduce the title. So the aim here is to integrate a brief explanation with a sample of your work. Sorry for this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and to explain that the aim here is to integrate a picture, an image, a graph, some visual aid, and then to explain this with a brief explanation of what it means, and how to collaborate in this endeavor that we have created with the timeline resource. So again, gonna share my screen and introduce you to our timeline. Here, Lily, if you want to add something, please be free to do it. So we have an example here of I don't know how to pronounce this, but a Polish primary source about forest as a resource. And here, Alex can explain this a little bit further.
Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you. I am so sorry about this. It seems that the internet on my side just cut out completely. So I'm just going to return to sharing my screen. I'm now using my mobile internet, and hopefully this will hold. Okay. Sorry, I seem to have lost what I'm, yeah, this one, okay. And now I want to share, sorry. This one. Yes, so yes, so we have started populating this timeline, and the idea is that we were going to ask you, all our participants, to also contribute to this timeline, so that at the end of the session, we would end up with a resource that includes sources from all around the world, and based on your research, you can add all sorts of different media to this timeline. This is loading because my internet is slow, but you can add YouTube videos. You can add, you can add photographs. You can add audio recordings, maps. On this slide here, it tells you all the different types of files you can add, but let me just start from the beginning with the instructions. So this. So the timeline that we currently have been populating is hosted here. the idea is to also host it at Lily's and Natalia's institutions, and also to share it with the organizers of the conference. The idea of this part of the session, sharing this tool with you, is twofold. One, to produce this timeline that will be a sort of digital artifact in its own right, but also to show you how such a timeline can be constructed so that you can then either teach your students to create their own timelines, perhaps use this timeline tool in your own teaching, or you'll be able to use this artifact to tell them a story that has a plurality of voices going in. So if you would be interested in contributing to the timeline, you need to follow this link that's on the slide to the Google form. I will also paste this into the chat. Oops, sorry. Yep. Okay. Sorry. And so the link is now also in the chat. Once you follow this link, it will take you to the website. Sorry. I keep missing my screens. I apologize for this. Was I sharing the right screen already?
Alex, if you like, I can share the screen.
Yeah, may just 1 second, Natty. I will try one more thing. I'm sorry, I think I got a little bit flustered now, but okay, there we go. I found what I need. So hopefully you should be able. Oh, I thought I did. Can you see the
Yes.
timeline screen?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for bearing with me. Deep breath, and now I carry on. So if you follow the link in the chat, it should take you here. It's a Google form that is only 3 pages long. You only need to fill in the windows that have the red asterisk in. So you can add the date of your event that you want to include in the timeline here. If something is happening before the current era, you need to put a minus at the start of the date. You can add a month and date, but sometimes with historical sources, we don't have that level of accuracy. So just to show you, I'm just going to put a random date here. And then we click next. We are not collecting your email addresses at all, by the way, so we won't see that once you submit your input. This headline is what will be displayed at the top of the timeline event. So, for example, forests in Poland. Then here in this body of text, you can write a description of the document that you are inputting, or tell us a little story about this event. Then here in this media link, media box, you can add a link to a photograph, video, a map, an audio recording. It's usually the easiest if this thing that you want to add to the timeline is already hosted somewhere online. So for example, it's an image on Wikipedia or in some other repository. You can just right click on that image and say open image in a new tab. This will then give you a URL for that image in the web browser file here, window here at the top. You just copy that and you put that into media. Then here you can ascribe the credit for the source, so who the author is or what repository you took it from. We would prefer if you used stuff that is in public domain, so we don't fall foul of copyright issues. You can also add a little thumbnail to your event if you want. For that, you would need to have a file on your computer, for example, and you can upload. Then we press next. And then this is the last page. Leave this field blank. This is just an artifact of the program. It's necessary to be there, but it needs to remain empty. The group is where you can put a keyword tag for your for the source that you are including. So for example, you can tag it by location, or if you're telling about a particular topic, you can use that. So kind of like a keyword you can put here. And then in the background, if you would like your little thing on the timeline to have a specific background, like some other photograph or image, or if you just want like a nice color, then you can type in, for example, green here, or you can again include a link to the image. And that's it. That's all that you need to do. And once you do that, your event will appear on this timeline. So it should be hopefully quite straightforward, and we were going to give you half an hour to create beautiful stories, but perhaps we could give you 5 to 7 minutes to maybe try to add one thing to our timeline. We would super appreciate if you could try to do that, and we'll be here ready to answer any questions. And then at the end of the session, we want to tell you a little bit more about our plans for the future with this collaboration.
I have a question about about the timeline, and it is oops. Now I lost myself. So what do you think should be on this timeline and what shouldn't be? So is it anything that has to do with the forest, or things that are restricted to forest stewardship?
Well, at the moment, we've been including anything related to the forest, but the idea, the intention was that we would have a curated timeline specifically in relation to forest stewardship around the world. So perhaps for now, just anything that is related to forest. And then maybe if you're interested in collaborating with us on this timeline, maybe we can stay in touch. And then as we edit the timeline a bit later, we could add more things to it and curate it more in the direction of forest stewardship in particular.
So just to showcase, I'm gonna add, for example, the Federico Albert general plan as a crucial step in culture to create a new relationship with Chilean forest. So as I'm gonna add that as an example, and maybe you can say to us what would you like to include in this timeline?
Me or our participants?
Our participants, Melanie, for example, you seem very focused. What would you integrate to our timeline?
I'm integrating the landmark Leahy report on forest practices in Nova Scotia, which for the first time here brought people both from the industry, the government, and the Mi'kmaq community together into like accepting forest practices that they all felt comfortable with. The story doesn't end well. Our government has still failed to implement the recommendation of the Leahy report, but it is still the go-to report in Nova Scotia. So it marks really a change in how we thought about forests here. And it is available online. And so I'm filling my entry and now have a question. So I entered the year and the month. I'm sure there's a date, but I don't know it. So I skip this and then it's written time. And I'm not sure what you're looking for as an answer there.
So we included that window because to allow people override if they, because due to the peculiarity of the timeline, we need to have like a specific year to be able to place it on the timeline. But sometimes like an event is like early 20th century or something like that. So we included that little window to allow that functionality so that people can add early 20th century, even if on the final timeline it will appear on the specific date that they placed it. So it's just an additional information. You can leave that one blank if it's not needed.
When you finish putting in your entry onto the timeline, could you let us know so that we can refresh it and then we can see it all together?
My internet's unstable. Sorry, Lily, if I missed something. My internet is a little bit unstable.
Not so much. I was early suggesting that when our participants finish putting in their entry, it would be so nice if we could see the result real time.
Yep, I will try to do that.
I've submitted my answer.
Could you give us some clue which year have you put in?
I didn't.
I'll refresh it again. Melanie, where should we look for your
2018.
2018.
Yeah, the very, very end.
aha?
Oh,
Yay!
oh no, the address, that's my mistake. Can I email you one?
Yes, message us and we'll update it. We can go in round the back of the timeline.
What happened?
But
repeated
yeah,
address.
the date and
Yeah,
fantastic.
I'll put it in the. The correct address.
So Natalia or Lily, if you keep sharing the timeline, I stop sharing my screen and I'll try to amend the.
Sure. Let me get on the timeline. Let's see. No, Nati, do you have it on your screen at the moment?
I put the new email in the chat.
Yeah,
because-
I know why.
My screen is sharing. Sorry, I didn't know.
Don't worry, ladies.
Sorry, I put
It's a PDF. Unfortunately, the timeline doesn't support PDFs, which is unfortunate. So that's why it's not loading. But you did everything correctly.
I didn't put that link in. That's
Oh, you didn't.
I didn't put that link. I put another link, which it is the fake thing to give you when they open the PDF in your browser. So the link might actually work, but otherwise I'll give you another one. Let me
Yeah,
put
I
government.
would like to add that I have failed uploading my image. I don't know why.
Did the rest of it work, Nati?
Yes.
Okay. So we still need to work on the adding the images and the files part of it. Maybe try to simplify this process a bit further. But thank you nonetheless so much for trying and bearing with us with the slight issues with my internet. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more before we completely finish the session, because we only have 4 minutes left. But basically, with this little workshop discussion session, we hoped to use it as a seed for future collaborations and to keep developing this. Also like to meet again and work some more. So like Natalia, Lily and I, we hoping to maybe develop, like co-develop some sort of curriculum that we could teach our students in different parts of the world in relation to forestry topics, you know, perhaps even co-teach online, doing guest lectures. We also hoped to have like we intended also in this session to have a discussion with you about the hopes and intentions and the challenges and limitations of using these sort of like digital sources for teaching. We ran out a bit of time for that, but we hoped to have like that sort of discussion too. And we would love to keep in touch with all of you. We are so grateful that you came and joined our session. And I don't know, Natalia and Lily, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, thank you both. This was a wonderful idea that Alex created. And I would like to highlight that this emerged out of, the fact that we are novel teachers, we are new lecturers. And I'm very happy and proud to say that one of my students is here, Lucas. He's a wonderful second year. Student, and hopefully he will be the next generation involved in environmental history. And this emerged out of the necessity of engage with our students in newer ways, and to think about how these new digital resources make more sense to them as a learning tool. So this is both a research tool, but also very instrumental for our teaching practices and how we think that our students going to learn new abilities and how they incorporate new knowledge, which is very different from what we were used to even 20 years ago. So Melanie, if you obviously have more experience than us, so please guide us, help us, and what it means to be also a teacher in the 21st century.
I have experience, but you have ideas. So here's my suggestion. Timeline is both a research tool, but also like a teaching tool, and such an important one. So what I will, right after the conference, right, there's a page that will appear about join the next projects, and of course your project it is at the top. I will remind Paige Crosby is the assistant curator who's working on the circulating knowledge exhibit, and I'll tell her that if any artifacts comes that are related to forestry, I'm pretty sure right now none have come this way, but that she should send them your way, and that more importantly, she's about to reach to other institutions. And so I will ask her to add like paragraph saying, right, on top of this, we would like you to reach out to this project to help them with their timeline. But more importantly, I hope you will, some of you will be able to join us at the very, very last session, the roundtable on pedagogy, which is about people presenting their pedagogical project. So since there are many people that will be there and will have ideas, people will just get 5-10 minutes, but I hope you'll be there. If you're not, I'll make sure to redirect people towards you. And I love the idea of co-teaching online and dropping in. We've started, Gordon McHugh started doing this with India. And I think that that would be fabulous. I can't remember this year, but I know next year someone will be teaching courses that would certainly welcome all of you as guest speaker, even from afar. So I will pass them their names, but don't hesitate to call on us. If you're in your own teaching, we'll be happy to join in if we can see anything. And I will find a better link for the Leahy report, or maybe a link to a story on it, so that you can, and it's too bad because we actually had Bill Leahy here for your talks, but he's the president of the university too, so he couldn't stay for the timeline. So he came just to hear what was happening elsewhere in the world. I thought it was really, really cool of him.
Thank
all the
you
stuff.
so much.
That sounds amazing. We would definitely love to stay in touch.
Okay,
Definitely.
so hopefully I'll see you tomorrow afternoon online. And we'll try to put your projects up at the beginning of the discussion.
Wonderful. It means a lot for us early career researchers and lecturers. Like,
It is-
thank
it
you
is
for having
An
us here.
amazing project and such an important one, and I encourage you to reach out also to local ecological organizations. I think that what you're doing would be important also for their own activism.
Okay, I think our time is up. Thank you, Deborah, Karian, Diana, Lucas, and everyone who joined. Again, this was oh, Deborah, you want to say something? Oh, okay. So we need to wrap up because but we would like to carry the conversation on. Hopefully I can join to the pedagogical panel. It's something that I'm really interested in, and thank you, Alex, again for thinking about this. And I don't know, I only have praise for you and the role that you have engaging with us
Thank
and
you so
with
much.
me in the global south.
I love collaborating with you, so I hope we can continue doing this for so long. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure for us. And yes, please reach out to us if you want to.
Yeah, I would be happy to reply to any email. And greetings from warm Bangkok. So go. Bye.